Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're watching or listening. My name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. Today we're going to be providing another installation to our Federalist Papers series going on number 64. So if you haven't gone back and watched 1 through 63, I would highly encourage you to do so, even though they're on the longer side, because one of the frequent criticisms from the late and great Justice Antonin Scalia about the legal education system is that they don't actually teach the Federalist Papers. And understanding the Federalist Papers, in addition to the Anti-Federalist Papers, will provide you a very advantageous supplementary understanding of the U.S. Constitution. And of course, understanding the U.S. Constitution is absolutely requisite if you intend to combat any sort of lawfare waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned properties. So let's go ahead and jump on over to the Federalist Papers. The version I'm using is provided by the federalistpapersproject.org, but there are multiple institutions from which you can get a paper and digital copy of the Federalist Papers. Go ahead and get both formats. While you're out there looking, pick up a paper and digital copy of the Anti-Federalist Papers so you can join us in comparing and contrasting the arguments for and against ratifying the U.S. Constitution. Excellent. So number 64 is titled The Powers of the Senate, written by Mr. John Jay in the Independent Journal, Wednesday, March 5th, 1788. He says this: To the people of the state of New York, it is a just and not a new observation that enemies to particular persons and opponents to particular measures seldom confine their censures to such things only in either as are worthy of blame, unless on this principle it is difficult to explain the motives of their conduct, who condemn the proposed Constitution in the aggregate and treat with severity some of the most unexceptionable articles in it. The second section gives power to the President, quote, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. The power of making treaties is an important one, especially as it relates to war, peace, and commerce, and it shouldn't be delegated, but in such a mode, and with such precautions as will afford the highest security that it will be exercised by men the best qualified for the purpose, and in the manner most conducive to the public good. The convention appears to have been attentive to both these points. They have directed the President to be chosen by select bodies of electors, to be deputed by the people for that express purpose, and they have committed the appointment of senators to the state legislatures. This mode has, in such cases, vastly the advantage of elections by the people in their collective capacity, where the activity of party zeal, taking the advantage of the supineness, the ignorance, and the hopes and fears of the unwary and interested, often places men in office by the votes of a small proportion of the electors. As the select assemblies for choosing the president, as well as the state legislatures who appoint the senators, will in general be composed of the most enlightened and respectable citizens, there is reason to presume that their attention and their votes will be directed to those men who only have become the most distinguished by their abilities and virtue, and in whom the people perceive just grounds for confidence. The Constitution manifests very particular attention to this object. By excluding men under 35 from the first office, and those under 30 from the second, it confines the electors to men of whom the people have had time to form a judgment, and with respect to whom they will not be liable to be deceived by those brilliant appearances of genius and patriotism, which, like transient meteors, sometimes mislead as well as dazzle. If the observation be well founded that wise kings will always be served by able ministers, it is fair to argue that as an assembly of select electors possess, in a greater degree than kings, the means of extensive and accurate information relative to men and characters, so will their appointments bear at least equal marks of discretion and discernment. The inference which naturally results from these considerations is this, that the President and senators so chosen will always be of the number of those who best understand our national interests, whether considered in relation to the several states or to foreign nations, who are best able to promote those interests, and whose reputation for integrity inspires and merits confidence. With such men, the power of making treaties may be safely lodged. Although the absolute necessity of system in the conduct of any business is universally known and acknowledged, yet the high importance of it in national affairs has not yet become sufficiently impressed on the public mind. They who wish to commit the power under consideration to a popular assembly composed of members constantly coming and going in quick succession, seem not to recollect that such a body must necessarily be inadequate to the attainment of those great objects which require to be steadily contemplated in all their relations and circumstances, and which can only be approached and achieved by measures which not only talents, but also exact information, and often much time, are necessary to concert and to execute. It was wise, therefore, in the convention to provide not only that the power of making treaties should be committed to able and honest men, but also that they should continue in place a sufficient time to become perfectly acquainted with our national concerns, and to form and introduce a system for the management of them. The duration prescribed is such as will give them an opportunity of greatly extending their political information, and of rendering their accumulating experience more and more beneficial to their country. Nor has the convention discovered less prudence in providing for the frequent elections of senators in such a way as to obviate the inconvenience of periodically transferring those great affairs entirely to new men. For by leaving a considerable residue of the old ones in place, uniformity in order as well as a constant succession of official information will be preserved. There are a few who will not admit that the affairs of trade and navigation should be regulated by a system cautiously formed and steadily pursued, and that both our treaties and our laws should correspond with and be made to promote it. It is of much consequence that this correspondence and conformity be carefully maintained, and they who assent to the truth of this position will see and confess that it is well provided for by making concurrence of the Senate necessary both to treaties and to laws. It seldom happens in the negotiation of treaties of whatever nature, but that perfect secrecy and immediate dispatch are sometimes requisite. These are cases where the most useful intelligence may be obtained, if the persons possessing it can be relieved from apprehensions of discovery. Those apprehensions will operate on those persons whether they are actuated by mercenary or friendly motives. And there doubtless are many of both descriptions who would rely on the secrecy of the President, but who would not confide in that of the Senate, and still less in that of a large popular assembly. The convention have done well, therefore, in so disposing of the power of making treaties, that although the President must, in forming them, act by the advice and consent of the Senate, yet he will be able to manage the business of intelligence in such a manner as prudence may suggest. They who have turned their attention to the affairs of men must have perceived that there are tides in them, tides very irregular in their duration, strength, and direction, and seldom found to run twice exactly in the same manner or measure. To discern and to profit by these tides in national affairs is the business of those who preside over them, and they who have had much experience on this head inform us that there frequently are occasions when days, nay, even when hours, are precious. The loss of a battle, the death of a prince, the removal of a minister, or other circumstances intervening to change the present posture and aspect of affairs, may turn the most favorable tide into a course opposite to our wishes. As in the field, so in the cabinet, there are moments to be seized as they pass, and they who preside in either should be left in capacity to improve them. So often and so essentially have we heretofore suffered from the want of secrecy and dispatch, that the Constitution would have been inexcusably defective if no attention had been paid to those objects. Those matters which in negotiations usually require the most secrecy and the most dispatch are those preparatory and auxiliary measures which are not otherwise important in a national view than as they tend to facilitate the attainment of the objects of the negotiation. For these the President will find no difficulty to provide, and should any circumstance occur which requires the advice and consent of the Senate, he may at any time convene them. Thus we see that the Constitution provides that our negotiations for treaties shall have every advantage which can be derived from talents, information, integrity, and deliberate investigations on the one hand, and from secrecy and dispatch on the other. But to this plan, as to most others that have ever appeared, objections are contrived and urged. Contrived? What a pretentious dweeb. Some are displeased with it, not on account of any errors or defects in it, but because, as the treaties, he's making a straw man, but because as the treaties when made are to have the force of laws, they should be made only by men invested with legislative authority. These gentlemen seem not to consider that the judgments of our courts and the commissions constitutionally given by our governor are as valid and as binding on all persons whom they concern as the laws passed by our legislature. Where does it say that in the Constitution? State or federal? Yeah. There's an argument for stare decisis not based in any sort of legal framework by our legislature. All constitutional acts of power, whether in the executive or in the judicial department, have as much legal validity and obligation as if they proceeded from the legislature. That is completely incorrect. And therefore, whatever name be given in the power of making treaties, or however obligatory they may be when made, certain it is that the people may, with much propriety, commit the power to a distinct body from the legislature, the executive, or the judicial. It surely does not follow that because they have given the power of making laws to the legislature, that therefore they should likewise give them the power to do every other act of sovereignty by which the citizens are to be bound and affected. Others, though content that treaties should be made in the mode proposed, are averse to their being the supreme laws of a land. They insist and profess to believe that treaties like acts of assembly should be repealable at pleasure. This idea seems to be new and peculiar to this country, but new errors as well as new truths often appear. These gentlemen would do well to reflect that a treaty is only another name for a bargain, and that it would be impossible to find a nation who would make any bargain with us, which should be binding on them absolutely, but on us only so long and so far as we may think proper to be bound by it. They who make laws may without doubt amend or repeal them, and it will not be disputed that they who make treaties may alter or cancel them. But still let us not forget that treaties are made, not by only one of the contracting parties, but by both. And consequently, that as the consent of both was essential to their formation at first, so must it ever afterwards be to alter or cancel them. The proposed Constitution, therefore, has not in the least extended the obligation of treaties. They are just as binding and just as far beyond the lawful reach of legislative acts now as they will be at any future period or under any form of government. That is completely untrue. That is a total misunderstanding of contract law. That's hilarious. However useful jealousy may be in republics, yet when, like bile in the natural, it abounds too much in the body politic, the eyes of both become very liable to be deceived by the delusive appearances which that malady casts on surrounding objects. From this cause probably proceed the fears and apprehensions of some that the President and Senate may make treaties without an equal eye to the interests of all the states. Others suspect that 2/3 will oppress the remaining third and ask whether those gentlemen are made sufficiently responsible for their conduct, whether if they act corruptly they can be punished, and if they make disadvantageous treaties, how are we to get rid of those treaties? As all the states are equally represented in the Senate, and by men the most able and the most willing to promote the interests of their constituents, they will all have an equal degree of influence in that body, especially while they continue to be careful in appointing proper persons and to insist on their punctual attendance. In proportion as the United States assume a national form and a national character, he stands alone on that belief. Even Hamilton said that's not true. So will the good of the whole be more and more an object of attention, and the government must be a weak one indeed, if it should forget that the good of the whole can only be promoted by advancing the good of each of the parts or members which compose the whole. Now there's a good political theory, a good political fact. It will not be in the power of the President and Senate to make any treaties by which they and their families and estates will not be equally bound and affected with the rest of the community, and having no private interest distinct from that of the nation, they will be under no temptations to neglect the latter. As to corruption, the case is not supposable. He must either have been very unfortunate in his intercourse with the world, or possess a heart very susceptible of such impressions, who can think it probable that the President and 2/3 of the Senate will ever be capable of such unworthy conduct. Go ahead and highlight that. How silly. Oh, Jay. Oh, Jay. The question is now begged, was Jay a fool, or was he being malicious? From his other writings, I tend to think he was just a fool, and not even naive. He was arrogant. He was warned many times by people like Jefferson about his positions, his ahistorical positions, but he held them nonetheless. So I tend to believe that Hamilton, I have found, according to their other writings, Hamilton was intentionally malicious. He knew he was lying. Jay was a fool, and then Madison was naive. Madison had good intentions, and that's proven multiple times in his future writings and orations. He was just simply naive and had bad impressions playing on his mind. But yeah, that's the analysis that I've come to find when reading through these gentlemen's further pennings and writings. Jay genuinely believed this stuff. He was just a fool. Hamilton knew he was lying, and then Madison had no idea he had bad influences. Anyway, back to Jay. The idea is too gross and too invidious to be entertained. Go ahead and highlight that. This would be a great time to say I told you so if Jay was still walking. But in such a case, if it should ever happen, the treaty so obtained from us would, like all other fraudulent contracts, be null and void by the law of nations. Go ahead and highlight that. Even Jay recognized the authority and the power of nullification. But if it should, let's go ahead and read that last line again. But in such a case, so if the president and if the Senate were to partake in this unworthy conduct, if Jay is saying this, if Hamilton is saying this, you can be rest assured that the other founders were in agreement, were in concert with this belief. But in such a case, where the president and the Senate collude in gross, unethical, illegitimate behavior, if it should ever happen, the treaty so obtained from us would, like all other fraudulent contracts, that includes laws. Law, charter, compact, constitution, those are all perfect and direct synonyms. So any actions that are derived or brought from false, illegitimate, unconstitutional behavior, such as collusion between the president and the Senate, are null and void. Null and void. Even John Jay is saying that. Okay, back to Jay. Sorry, I just had to interject because sometimes when I'm reading through these, specifically when I'm reading through Hamilton's and Jay's, I can't help myself because they are, Jay is the fool and then Hamilton is the devious miscreant. Anyway, back to Jay. With respect to their responsibility, it is difficult to conceive how it could be increased. Every consideration that can influence the human mind, such as honor, oath, reputations, conscience, the love of country and family, affections and attachments, affords security for their fidelity. If men were angels, everything would work out just fine. In short, as the Constitution has taken the utmost care that they shall be men of talents and integrity. Go ahead and highlight that line as well. We have reason to be persuaded that the treaties they make will be as advantageous as, all circumstances considered, could be made. And insofar as the fear of punishment and disgrace can operate, that motive to good behavior is amply afforded by the article on the subject of impeachments. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, so that's all Mr. J had to say in number 64. I apologize for my frequent interjections and my mockery of Mr. J, but it was, I can't help myself. He was warned, he was told, he knew, or not knew, he was made aware of the errors of his thinking, yet, like an arrogant fool, chose to stick to his dogma than to adopt the realities of history and of political governance, or of governance, the what do you want to call them? The principles, the axioms, whatever you'd like to call them, the foundations of political science. Anyway, without further ado, if you have any questions about what was being said by Mr. J in 64, or what was said in the preceding papers, or maybe a topic you'd like me to cover in a future lecture, go ahead and post those down in the comments, because the entire purpose of the Calhoun School of Law is to provide you with the necessary skills and information to combat any sort of lawfare that will be waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So please, if you have any questions at all, post them down in the comments. Excellent. So my name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and if not, while you're down in the comments, let me know how I can do better so I can best serve that purpose of helping you. I hope y'all have a wonderful day, and I'm not sure what the topic for the next lecture will be, but I'll do my best to make it as informative and entertaining as this one, if not more so, regardless of the topic of the next lecture. Until I see y'all then, I bid you all farewell.